So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and I was going to do the Dol Amroth siege battle that was 3v4, but unfortunately once again time is running rather short. But I do have quite a few battles that I've actually got in the pipeline, but I'm going to do this one first, mainly because I'm actually in this one, so I'll actually be able to show a battle that I'm in for once. And this one is on the Runic Steppe, I think this one is. It's Steppe or Highland. They're two maps of kind of similar-esque features, I suppose. This one's bumpy, and there is a cluster of trees over here, which actually I have the good fortune to be able to take advantage of here. But unfortunately, on the other side of the battle, you can see that the other two are also probably going to be fighting over this hill over here. So in the late game, I could find myself having to advance into very unfavourable terrain indeed. But obviously, this is actually a three-way free-for-all, so it'll be interesting to see how this one goes. And obviously, the fact that I'm showing it shows that one player didn't just camp outside of the battle and then crush the leftovers of two players who actually wanted to fight. So there is going to be a good amount of back and forth here. And we'll start off with my army first of all, and I'm playing as a faction which I usually do absolutely terribly with, and that is Rohan. So I've got a couple of units of these Riddermark archers, and I've gone for a lighter foot archer presence for reasons that will become obvious as we get into what I brought on horseback. But I did want to bring some foot archers, particularly as I knew that considering I'm facing off today against both Dale and Arthedain, that I could make cheaper archers pay for themselves quite easily against these factions, as it's going to be quite difficult to be cost effective against an archer that's as cheap as this, particularly if they've invested pretty heavily in that sort of thing. Now over here I think I have 5 units of these Eastmark spearmen. Now this is something that I would never do in a 1v1 because they simply aren't going to be strong enough to hold up a front line all on their own, but in a situation where I was expecting to have to divide my forces, having a cheaper front line was something I felt would be a little bit more useful to me in this situation, because not only do they have a bonus against cavalry, so enemy cavalry can't simply charge them from the front and expect to get away with it for free, but they are very cheap and they can act as a decent tar pit, and if I use all of them all at once in one pretty dense section of the battlefield, it'll take quite a long time for my opponents to chew through them, but obviously they are the lowest tier of unit that I can bring as Rohan, so I'm riding on these guys to last in battle a little bit longer than I perhaps would give them credit for in a faction overview, for example. Just over here you can see the cavalry force that I've got pointing at Dale is small but very, very deadly potentially. Starting off with my general's unit, you can see him there hidden away in the back. We can see the Sons of Yore, which I think are at the very least the joint cheapest knight unit in the game. This doesn't make them any less effective, however. In terms of their defensive values and armour, they are a little bit lacking to something like the Knights of Illuminus, for example. But they have slightly more on the attack to make up for this, I believe, and obviously very, very dangerous. Dale has got nothing which could beat them one-to-one, which is why I had them stationed over here. Essentially all on their own they can act as a pretty good deterrent against all but an overwhelming force of Earls. But just in case they did come at me with 2 units of Earls, I do have a unit of Riddermark skirmishers, of course, the Jav-Cav, Melee-Cav hybrid, so they will do a very good job of backing up my knights, so that should be enough to keep Dale from getting any sort of manoeuvrability advantage over me. Also, I've got a couple of units of Eowyn Shield Maidens, pretty much a must-bring in most Rohan picks, I think, because they inspire nearby troops, of course, and their ranged attacks are very, very deadly. They'll be very useful, and this is what I'm really counting on to do damage against Dale should they try and rush me down, because obviously my infantry, my spearmen at the front, are certainly not going to do that. And also I decided to go for a bit of a risk. I wouldn't go for the Meduseld Guard as well as the Eowyn Shield Maidens under most situations in a field. But I decided to bring them in this case because I really wanted a lot of close range punch, and hopefully if I can sort of bide my time with my skirmishers and keep Dale at arm's length, if Dale doesn't have any archers to deal with my shield maidens and my Meduseld Guard, then his army's going to get ripped apart in the late game, which is what I'm going for here. I do have some infantry which is of more decent quality, however, and I've got 3 units of the Riddermark Axemen hidden in the trees. Obviously some good AP, which is potentially useful against both Arthedain and Dale, and I've got them hidden sort of here in between, right in the middle of my army, just to sort of potentially stop an Arthedain infantry advance, or potentially to wrap around on Dale's infantry line should they try and charge right up the gut. And then this is the rest of my cavalry force, which as you can see is, well, we started with 1 more unit for the Riddermark Skirmishers, obviously Jav-Cav, Melee-Cav hybrid. Pretty useful, I think, for just sort of blocking the way for any of Arthedain's cavalry. The rest of this army over here is horse archers. Got a couple of units here of Riders of the Fold, which are, you know, very good horse archers now, I think. You know, they always had a bit of a reputation, at least in my opinion, in vanilla of being very much not worth their price point, but here I think they are considerably, well, in Reforged they are considerably more worth it. I've got 2 units of those, and I also have 2 more units of the lower tier Eastmark horse archers. So I've got a lot of horse archers here, hoping to skirmish down with Arthur Dane from a distance, get my manoeuvrability rolling. And I was taking a bit of a gamble here, obviously putting all of these on Arthur Dane's flanks. If they went for archer heavy and went for all of their heavier cavalry on this side, my horse archers would simply have to run away, and I'd have to very quickly sort of rotate my army around and perhaps even try and retreat a little bit into the corner, which I don't really want to do. But it is a possibility, considering this is a little bit of a risk. But now we shall move on to Arthur Dane. So as we head on over here, you can see that he has adopted a rather interesting formation. It's very wide and long, so it's encompassing basically, expecting I think an advance from both fronts, but it's also in loose formation, so it's not a particularly dense formation. But Arthur Dane of course do have a few surprises in store, potentially. Got some Dunedain Mounted Company down here of course. Good quality lancers. They share a unit model of course with the Cardland equivalents of a similar unit, but against my horse archers, they're quick, so I do need to be on my toes with my horse archers, but with my Riddermark skirmishers there, honestly I'm not too worried about a unit like this. It would be a more heavy duty unit which would cause me concern. And also the Dunedain scouts, honestly they're going to struggle to get cost effectiveness against such numbers of horse archers, which is why I'm kind of confused as to why Arthur Dane brought units like this against Rohan of all factions, but perhaps he was just hoping for a combined archer strategy and taking advantage of Rohan's slightly lighter armour values. He's got some pikemen here covering a trebuchet, which is a bold move. In a 1v1 field battle I would certainly not recommend you bring a trebuchet, but here it could work. If he's hoping that my army and Dale's army will blob up on one another a little bit, then he can really take advantage with this trebuchet. You can see it's already firing because its range is enormous. And then over here we can see some Evendim archers and some Evendim spearmen. Obviously the lower tier of Arthur Dane's units. Very cost effective, 2 pair of units indeed. Going to be quite difficult for my archers to get cost effectiveness against them, and I do want to keep my horse archers away from them if at all possible. Now he does have some Dunedain troll slayers and rangers hidden in his army somewhere, as you would expect from an Arthur Dane army. He's also got some dismounted Fornoster Rain Knights of course with their heavy armour. Can outclass any of my infantry that I've brought today, but perhaps that won't be the case with Dale as we sort of scoot through these armies. More Evendim units, some more Arthur Dane pikemen as well, so a good counteracting force against cavalry. Some standard Arthur Dane men-at-arms as well, which will outclass the equivalents from Dale and Rohan. And then also some more men-at-arms, and he also has a cavalry force over on this flank as well. So we've got some more Dunedain scouts, and I believe more mounted company. Indeed we do. But other than that, the rest of his units are going to be hidden. So he's got some rangers, and he's got some troll slayers, and perhaps I think he's got some grey company hidden around here as well. But finally, before we get into the battle itself, we will have a look at the final army commanded by Dwaling. I should say that Arthur Dane of course is commanded by Master Blaster, but Dale here going for a much more tightly packed formation than myself and Arthur Dane, who were expecting an attack from 2 flanks. At the front here we've got some Lake Town bowmen, easy to get cost efficiency with these, so we've all gone for cheaper archers, although Dale have baked in some heavier archers into the deal, so he's got some upgraded Bardian marksmen. Going to be very, very difficult to skirmish with this unit, so I'm hoping they'll use up all their ammo. He's got a very dense front line over here of Barding Herd combined with Dalian Spearmen, so obviously this is going to be very effective against cavalry. The effectiveness against armour is also going to be good against some of Arthur Dane's more heavy duty units. But honestly, Arthur Dane have gone for a more light armour approach this time, so maybe the Barding Herd won't be quite as effective. We've got some Greenwood Lumbermen as well, so again an AP unit. Not going to be too useful against either of myself or Arthur Dane's army, but they are cheap. Some more Bardian marksmen over here on the flank, and then getting back here we've got some more expensive units. Obviously we've got the Blackshot Dragon Slayers, potentially very, very strong. Over the course of a battle they can really make their presence felt on key units throughout the field. And then he has got 2 units of Earls of Dale, so he's really going to be having to use these guys in a defensive manner against both myself and potentially Arthur Dane's cavalry. But without further ado, let us begin. Dale finds themselves probably in the most disadvantageous starting position in this little gully, but if he moves up onto this ridge line he could quickly turn that around, because then he will have a slight elevation advantage, at least in part, against Arthur Dane. But taking that hilltop is obviously going to be a bit of a priority. Neither of the 2 armies that have deployed on this side of the field are going to be able to ignore it safely. You can see Arthur Dane is already sweeping forward. But you can see over there as well that the trebuchet is going to be trying to zero in on some of my positions over here. I think in fact they do land a half decent hit on my horse archers, but of course that's not really the biggest loss for me because they are in loose formation, and as soon as they do take a little bit of casualties I'm just going to retreat them back a little bit further behind the ridge line, hopefully get him to waste a little bit more of his ammunition. And you can see that I am actually going to shift my army. I saw that, you know, Arthedain had sort of spread themselves thin a little bit. He is moving more of his cavalry over to my side, of course, which I expected immediately to have all of the cavalry on the field be pointing at me, seeing as that is usually what Rohan have in their court. But obviously Dale getting up onto this ridge line, attempting to skirmish with Arthedain. Neither side is really going to see too much of an advantage develop here. If anything, this is probably a little bit more in favour of Dale, simply because I think their front line here of spears and halberds will easily be able to deal with some of this Arthedain militia. Arthedain are a little bit thinly stretched, but they have managed to take up a decent position up on this hill. So they had some Banderbrass archers which were hidden as well, so they're going to try and get some nice fire down into the main Dale line. Decent damage on these guys, but as soon as the skirmish fire starts coming back at them, they will drop like flies. Also got some standard men-at-arms over here. So for the time being, it's more of a skirmish fight between Arthedain and Dale, although I think actually if we go back over to here, we can see that my Riddermark archers are actually in range of some of Dale's flanking units, and it's actually the Bardian marksmen, so I do decide to start firing. All of my spears are on Dale's side, because I did actually feel with the Earls of Dale over here that Dale could send an expeditionary force here. He'd be foolish to with all of my hidden units, but it was nonetheless a possibility, so I wanted to be prepared for that. But really my attention was focused over here, because Arthedain's cavalry is starting to menace my own flank a little bit, and indeed he's got his Dunedain scouts up on the high ground over here, so claiming a bit of high ground will put them in a bit of an advantageous position if my horse archers should come forward, but even so, with sheer brute force and numbers, I will be able to override these Dunedain scouts relatively easily. Riders of the Fold are a little bit more tanky than the Dunedain scouts, and the Eastmark archers just adding to the volume of fire. They do have some lancers over here, but I'm not particularly worried about that, to be honest with you, not with my Riddermark skirmishers on station. But the Trebuchet is firing into my line, but again, it is interesting because in a 1v1 this would not be an issue for me, but I'm having to sort of keep some sort of line facing Dale, and this does mean that he's got some nice enfilading fire there with his Trebuchet along my line. Now my Eastmark spears are my cheapest unit, so I don't really mind them dying off too much, but it is of course worth mentioning that he's getting some nice kills here, and if I do lose too many of my spearmen, that's going to be a real problem for me. Well, if we have a look over here, these Greenwood Lumbermen are not likely to get too far. The Arthedain men-at-arms and the Hobbitry in arms should be able to keep them at bay relatively easily. As you see just over there on the hillside, the Dunedain Scouts and the Dunedain Mounted Company, but here is where the first battle is going to take place. The Hobbitry in arms are actually going to absorb this charge, which is good, because that will allow these Arthedain men-at-arms to get into battle without taking too many casualties off the charge, and these Greenwood Lumbermen are not going to be able to get very far without support. They are a lower tier unit. The Hobbitry in arms are not really anything to be too concerned about, but interestingly enough, as we see over here, Arthedain are pressuring on both flanks, which is brave. I would have expected a little bit more conservative, him to be a little bit more conservative with his cavalry. He charges right into my Riddermark archers. They were vulnerable, but honestly this is definitely not worth it, because they went right into the jaws of all of my archers. My Riddermark skirmishers were able to throw their javelins in there, so these Dunedain Mounted Company are going to start to fall away, and obviously my Sons of Yore are also getting around to try and get a nice side charge off. And my archers are really not that expensive. They really were, along with my spearmen, the throwaway part of my army in many ways. So definitely not the start that Arthedain wanted, and indeed they break, so very much not the start they wanted. I'm also sending forward the first units of my horse archers to try and force the Dunedain scouts off of this hill. We can actually see that the Earl's sort of squeezing in a little bit more, but I do have my shield maidens and such over here. But actually it's about time we turn the speed down a little bit, because everything is all going to start happening at once as I make a move on Arthedain, and so is Dale, and potentially as well we'll start to see the three-way fight emerge. Now the Dalian spearmen charging into the Evendim spears, obviously this is something which the Dalian army is going to be very well positioned to win, especially once the Barding Herd get in here. And obviously the Arthedain men-at-arms are here, but with those armour-piercing halberds that isn't going to be sufficient for them to win. Now the Dunedain Rangers might be able to turn this fight in favour of Arthedain if their infantry holds for long enough, and provided they have a decent view of the enemy, because of course they could get obstructed. Those Dalian spearmen, however, in their formation with their spears down, backed up by the Bardish axes of the Barding Herd, and up on top of the hill we can see that the Greenwood Lumbermen defeat is a distinct possibility, but the Lake Town River Patrol are here. I'm not sure you really want to be using your javelins on a unit which is as cheap as these guys, but you might have to, because at this rate it's looking as though these Greenwood Lumbermen might lose to all of these professional troops, although it'll be close. But you probably want to secure victory here on the hilltop to force Arthedain back down the hill. It remains to be seen how this is going to go, really, but definitely Dale, who probably put the most power in their central infantry corps, are definitely going to have the best time here. With all of these Barding Herd and these solid Dalian spears. Arthedain really only brought one unit of those 4 Nosterrain Knights which could counter this, and they are getting sent forward, but honestly you can see how quickly the very thin Arthedain line is starting to struggle, so not great for them. The Trebuchet has turned its position around, well, its firing angle around to try and target the Dalian line, which is definitely a good move, because they are very densely packed, and a good hit here could honestly swing this entire fight. And you can also see that these Earls are trying to go for a gap now. Let's have a look and see what's going on over here. Obviously you can see again me just trying to skirmish down with Arthedain on this side. All of my horse archers getting into position. In fact, I think we've already missed the entire contribution of the Grey Company. They revealed themselves and tried to skirmish with me, but the Grey Company are not the sort of horse archer that you can expose to too much arrow fire, because they do not stand up well to it. They are essentially rangers on horseback, and all the same weaknesses and strengths apply. They've got body piercing, so they can do a decent amount of damage, but when you can single them out, they're going to fall away pretty quickly. And you can see also these Evendim archers are out in front with some Evendim spearmen. Arthedain's army has essentially been split in 2 at this point, so it's not looking good for them. This is a rather interesting move. These Earls of Dale are going to try and charge into the back of all of these Evendim spears and Arthedain men-at-arms. Now, they aren't shock cavalry, so they won't get too much damage done here. The Rangers are definitely the real prize, because obviously they are one of the things which could well turn this battle around, although they don't have the best angle of fire, and the Earls are going to be able to withstand some of that body piercing a little bit more than most units, with a good shield value, and obviously very thick armour like most of the high tier Dalian units have. But obviously this is not going to go too well for them, as these Rangers do get charged, which is unfortunate for them. They won't take too much in terms of losses, honestly, from melee cavalry, but Arthedain's lines are looking quite compromised over here, but Dale have taken some pretty hefty losses. You can see the charred remains of some of the units which got hit by the Trebuchet. The 4 Nosterrain Knights have somewhat stemmed the bleeding, but I don't think it's going to be enough, especially not when you see the Lake Town River Patrol cresting the hill. That's going to be more javelins coming in. Arthedain do have a pretty hefty skirmish presence, but if we look over here, I have committed my Riddermark Axeman over here to destroy the Arthedain Expeditionary Force, because he made life the most uncomfortable for me early on with that Trebuchet, and I think mainly because Dale and Arthedain, particularly with how aggressive Dale's infantry was against Arthedain to try and take that hilltop, in just a moment you're going to see Dale and Arthedain cease hostilities with one another to focus their attention a little bit more on me, which is very understandable. It's often how these 3-way fights end up going. You can see these Riddermark Axemen coming over here. See, there are some Bardian Marksmen and of course the Blackshot Dragon Slayers over here, but I don't really have anything. I do have my Eastmark Spears, which I will move up in just a moment to engage Dale's rather exposed flank. I mean, it's not really going to be the most deadly unit to try and take advantage of an exposed flank, but I work with what I have. I definitely put all my eggs into the cavalry and axe thrower basket in this one. You can see these Rangers, obviously they're not going to do too well in a sustained fight against these Earls of Dale. The melee cavalry, no anti-cavalry bonus in melee, but you can see now dismounted 4 Nosterrain Knights. These Lake Town River Patrol pulled out their swords, so they are probably out of ammunition. Definitely not the most hardy unit in melee, but you know, as long as you have something which can just attack the rear of the enemy lines, you're probably in a pretty good place. And now up here, obviously with the support of these Bardian Marksmen that are out of ammunition, that's going to be curtains for the Arthedain assault on the hill. Dale is going to claim it. And now you can see the Banderbrass archers actually countercharging into the Lake Town River Patrol, who do still have their ammunition apparently, considering they pulled their javelins back out. Interesting developments here. But obviously the Earls of Dale running roughshod over the back lines. And now as we have a look over here, see the Dunedain Mounted Company is somewhat retreating, or well, moving over to try and deal with these Earls of Dale, but he doesn't really have the cavalry presence to truly contest that. The Earls of Dale will relatively easily defeat Dunedain Mounted Company, and the Dunedain Scouts are not going to be a match for them. And obviously this is going to be exactly the sort of excuse I need to get my cavalry round the back, my Sons of Yore, my Riddermark Skirmishers. Still have another unit of Riddermark Skirmishers, and now I'm moving in basically with my archers and all of my cavalry. I'm going to try and pressurise Arthedain from this side. and then I'm going to slowly but surely inch my spears up on the other side eventually. But you can obviously see here the Riddermark Axemen, far too powerful for a unit of basic Evendim spears. Obviously the Evendim archers were caught out of formation as well. And at this point in time I think you can start to see the temporary alliance start to form, because you can definitely see these Lake Town bowmen are heading back down towards my position over here, and the trebuchet is also going to turn back around in just a moment I believe as well. Nice hit by the trebuchet there though, right into the heart of that Dalian infantry. You need to be careful not to get friendly fire though, that would be curtains for Arthedain. Arthedain definitely spread themselves too thin, but that is something to be remarked upon in the post game I think. These Lake Town River Patrol, they're shaken in the face of hobbits. That just goes to show how powerful they aren't. You can see over here these Riders of the Fold trying to fire in. There's Arthedain pikemen. I'm trying to really focus down on the pikemen. This Dunedain Mounted Company is going to charge right into the front of my Riddermark skirmishers. That's a terrible idea. He really needs to be conserving his cavalry here, because otherwise I'm going to be able to find gaps in his line, which he really doesn't want at this point. Dunedain scouts, as we see here, it's essentially the same situation all across the line. The Arthedain cavalry is crumbling beneath the might of the Rohirrim. A lot of it is skirmishers, to be fair. You can also see these Riddermark skirmishers here throwing their javelins, a very strong unit that Rohan can use in this sort of situation. And you can see these Arthedain pikemen just being pelted by all kinds of arrows, whether it be my horse arrows or my Riddermark archers. You can see here now that I am going to move forward with my Eastmark spearmen to try and take advantage of Dale's slightly more vulnerable flank, and also to get these Lake Town bowmen to stop firing, because that could be a little bit more of a problem for me if they continue to fire into my flanks. Although if they keep firing into my my axemen, that's really my one unit of dedicated infantry that's got a genuine bite to it. But my spears will stop them from firing. I believe that is the Arthedain general. He's somewhere. But this is a unit that I didn't really enjoy finding out the existence of, the Dunedain Troll Slayers, because they will make life a little bit more difficult for my cavalry. I've only got one unit of cavalry which has got a nice charge bonus on it, and that's got my general in it, so I definitely don't want to be risking him being skewered by the Dunedain Troll Slayers, and they're nasty in melee as well with those two-handed axes. I think this unit of Riddermark skirmishers I have, I decided to commit forward to try and stop his trebuchet from firing on my Eastmark spearmen, I should say, because that was definitely a very important part of my front line with Dale. And you can see actually that the Lake Town bowmen and the Bardian marksmen fleeing in the face of my militia, but the Riddermark spear is getting a nice charge there onto the trebuchet. And also I sent forward a unit of Riders of the Fold that was out of ammunition to charge in. Obviously they've only got a charge bonus of 1 being horse archers, but just trying to prevent them from using their javelins, so I'm just going to try and saturate them, which as it turns out not the best idea. In a sustained fight they are more than prepared to deal with such aggression. Meanwhile you can see over here the Riddermark Axemen. This fight is actually still going on, so Arthedain was consistently feeding more and more trash units into my Axemen, but obviously the axes were unfazed by this, easily able to deal with them. And seeing as I saw the rest of basically Dale's army feeding down the hill, now realising that I was the target of both of my opponents, I decided to form up a nice shield wall here and get my Eastmark spearmen ready for the assault that they would be brought under. And I knew that Dale would be able to defeat my Eastmark spears, especially with hits from the trebuchet like that. But I was hoping to sort of defeat Arthedain's position over here so that I could then commit my Sons of Yule and my axe throwers, of course, because Dale will have used up a huge amount of ammunition on Arthedain in the fight for the hill. Now the fight for the forest will begin, or the woods. You can see some more Riddermark skirmishers, those Dunedain Troll Slayers continuing to do damage, but I do decide to send my Sons of Yule in to try and get some casualties inflicted on them, because this is really one of the most dangerous units left on the field for my continued success. But I do need to get my Sons of Yule out of there, otherwise they will start to fall away to those AP axes. These Eastmark horse archers getting some nice kills on the pikemen, because I can't charge the trebuchet anymore because of those pikes. But I do have, of course, I'm consolidating now, my Riddermark axemen coming in. Another really nice hit there on those Eastmark spears. And as we can see now, the Dalian infantry, which may have had to fight through Arthedain, but with the support of that trebuchet and with all of these Barding herd, my basic spears are not going to be a match for the Dalian infantry without support. Fortunately, I do have support, of course, in the shape of my Eowyn shield maidens, who are going to get into position and start to throw their axes, as well as the Meduseld guard. And also I do have those Riddermark axemen coming in from the flank, but they are now the target of the trebuchet. And I'm also going to be taking fire from that Lake Town River Patrol, which is not ideal for me. So Dale certainly do represent a bit of a problem for me, but this is where they really throw away one of their primary tools. They charge directly into Riddermark skirmishers that still have a bit of ammunition left in them. Riddermark skirmishers, of course, melee cavalry, just like the Earls of Dale, but they are vastly outnumbered, and of course they're going to be taking javelin fire in amongst all of this. So the Earls of Dale are unfortunately going to fall away, which is completely surrendering the mobility advantage in this battle to me now. Only the Dunedain Troll Slayers and the Blackshot Dragon Slayers really represent a threat to my heaviest cavalry, and those Earls of Dale thrown away really. Bit of poor micro, but you can see my Riddermark archers still have a bit of ammo, and I'm going to send them to try and clog up the trebuchet once they are out of ammunition. In fact, this flank of Dale did fall apart, so my Riddermark Axemen and my Eastmark Spearmen are pursuing. Actually, those units routed, so they must have been hit by the trebuchet. The trebuchet is doing a real number on my line at this point, and I can't really do anything about it, so the trebuchet did certainly turn out to be a very wise pick indeed. Another really nice hit. Quite a fortunate pick, but still, this is one of those few situations where you'll see the trebuchet really work for you in an open field. But I am now moving forward my AoE shield mains. I was a little bit concerned that the Dalian archers still had ammunition, but at this point I realised if I continue to lose infantry like this, I'm not going to be able to defend my shield maidens, and they won't be able to use their axes, and that could be enough to swing victory away from me. But with that trebuchet, of course, anything is possible. Arthedain could still win this with that trebuchet and those troll slayers. My cavalry did fall back, and with all of my cavalry I am still in the driving seat here. You can see here that my infantry, this is where you really pay the price for bringing cheap infantry. My Eowyn shield mains are trying to march into position, but they are going to get caught in melee with some of these Dalian units if they're not careful. As you can see here, quality, you get what you pay for. The Eastmark Spearman really struggling against the disciplined and heavily armoured Barding herd. Oof. That is another nice hit, although this is actually on Dalian units, so I mean Arthedain can't really miss because we're both his opponents, but I think he was probably trying to go for my infantry more so than Dale's. I'm fairly certain, based on the movement of the troops during this battle, that I was ganged up on at some point. You can see here that in order to try and prevent my shield maidens from being accosted in melee, I am sort of charging in what cavalry I have, and these Lake Town River Patrol are not great. They break in the face of that. And now the Eowyn shield maidens are starting to throw their axes, although with the crumbling of my infantry line, one of them actually did get caught in melee, but they're pretty stout melee performers as well. I mean, they don't do a huge amount of damage in melee, but they will hold. They don't go down easily. Here come the Riddermark skirmishers. So once again, I'm just going to try and charge in, try and do some damage to these Lake Town bowmen, stop as many of Dale's archers from firing as I can, because then my close range hand-thrown projectiles are probably going to be sufficient to win me this fight. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers are still a bit of a concern, and you can see with the complete crumbling of my Eastmark Spearman, it's really down to my my shield mains at this point to hold the line for me. One unit of shield mains will suffice for this, however. The other one will still be able to fire, so dividing up my forces there rather than blobbing them up. The Medusald Guard is somewhere, indeed there they are. Are they firing? Not just yet, but they're trying to fire. I think they were obstructed for some time, but they of course are a very, very potent unit indeed. I think one unit of Lake Town Bowmen completely destroyed there, and it's here where my cavalry is really going to start to pay dividends. What's going on over here? I think we can see what's left of my Riddermark archers. Defeat seems certain, obviously, in the face of the pikes and the troll slayers. I have stopped the trebuchet from firing for the time being, though, which is really all I can ask for. Defeat seems almost certain, which is interesting. You can see here a nice downhill charge from the Sons of Yore right into the Blackshot Dragon Slayers. Need to be careful I don't get surrounded by the Bardian marksmen and caught in melee with the Dragon Slayers for too long, because of course they are very potent in melee. But as long as I can keep them from firing, that will just hasten my victory here as my cavalry continues to make a nuisance of itself. But it's really here in the trees where I'm having the best of luck, because this clump of Dalian infantry, which represents the bulk of the strength they have in melee left, has just been pelted by the shield maidens' axes and the Medusald Guard. The Medusald Guard actually now, I think, we can see them throwing, and indeed we can. I think that's actually them throwing into the back of the Barding herd, because I do recognise these guys as a threat to my cavalry. This was a bit of a overzealous charge by me, getting right into the heart here, going for the Dragon Slayer. This is in amongst the Barding herd as well, so I'm just sort of charging there. The two-handed axe is out. Need to make sure my general gets out of there, and he takes quite a lot of damage there from that. And I think this is just about it for my forces up here. The Riddermark archers routing off. Those do come back, but ultimately I don't really stand too much of a chance. I have thinned out the Arthedain forces out here, but the trebuchet is still active, much to my dismay, because obviously one good hit on my or Dalian units could turn this around. Arthedain would be very fortunate to win at this stage though. Oof, and that's obviously a lethal position that my shield mains have taken up, right into the rear of all of these Dalian infantry units, and they are starting to fall away now. So it is looking more and more like my victory is going to be pretty much secured here. See here, a lot of my units are dead though, all of my spears fell away, all of my melee infantry is gone, most of my cavalry. But I felt very vindicated by the end of the battle of my decision to bring the Medusal Guard and the Shield Maidens, because here in the late game, when he's got limited ammunition and too many targets to fire at, they are really paying dividends. There's really nothing Dale can do about this. It's like fish in a barrel. You can see that his Barding Herd slowly but surely getting worn down, because his Blackshot Dragon Slayers obviously could counteract them with their AP missiles, and they are trying to now. This is obviously going to leave the door open for my cavalry to basically have their way with them. And he can't target everything. He doesn't have enough archers left. He expended a lot of his ammunition in his struggle with Arthedain on the hill, whereas I managed to hold enough in reserve to secure victory here. Now, my Shield Maidens over here are out of ammunition, so I'm just going to charge both units in, surround them, and there should be enough to finish them off. With all the damage that those thrown axes did, it's going to be a bridge too far for the Dalian infantry. Dale's infantry is often very resilient in this sort of situation. Bitten off more than they can chew. My Riddermark skirmishers have been real MVPs to me as well. They've really helped secure my cavalry advantage, which is what has won me this battle. Which is strange, because Dale do have obviously those Earls which were misused, and they can be used to stunt Rohan's cavalry a little bit. But also I was very surprised in the kind of cavalry that Arthedain brought, because obviously Arthedain can go for those heavily armoured knights, which can go toe-to-toe with Rohan, and in select cases beat Rohan. But Arthedain went for quite an unorthodox army build, and it didn't pay off at all. I think the formation and the kind of units that the Arthedain player brought, unfortunately for him, it just wasn't sufficient. And this was far from an orthodox Rohan army, I must say. The very low tier amount of, well, the high amount of low tier spears that I had is not the sort of thing you'll see too often outside of a scenario like this, but it worked. See the Sons of Yore getting a nice rear charge there. Just doing my best here to finish them off. I think at this point actually some Riddermark archers over there, my Eowyn shield mains. You have to see the Arthedain pikemen forming up on the hill, and my Medusal Guard moving in. Obviously there's nothing left on the field which can stand up one-to-one to the Medusal Guard regardless of whatever else is happening. Now you can see obviously the Blackshot Dragon Slayers will probably fight to the death, but they will of course fall away, which actually means Arthedain will survive longer than Dale, interestingly enough. Those Riddermark archers are going to clatter into the back of the Dunedain Troll Slayers and the Arthedain pikemen, but now proving to the world who the true javelin units are, well, axe throwers I suppose, the Eowyn Shield Maidens, finally removing the last of these pesky Arthedain units, which the Troll Slayers and the pikemen were the reason that Arthedain lasted this long. Otherwise I definitely would have made that trebuchet a priority. There goes the Dalian general at the hands of the Shield Maidens. I think actually Arthedain do still have one unit left alive, and I think it is a unit up on this hill, and indeed it is the Rangers, so the Earls of Dale did not fully finish them off, but this is the one unit that's left alive, so let's continue this. And you can obviously see here that they are going to try and kill off as many as they can, but obviously it's not going to amount so much. These Dunedain Rangers are going to fall away very easily to my heavy cavalry. I do like the new Riddermark skirmishers, the fact that they use those two-handed axes in melee. Obviously not the most practical thing on horseback, but it looks cool.
The battle is very much in our favour. Victory will
that is going to be it. So victory was mine, and technically speaking I was the fortunate one in this sort of situation. One player always manages to dodge more of the early game casualties than most, and that was me on this occasion, and it is why I think I won. But having said that, I did move in on Arthedain's flank, and I was moving in on Dale as they sort of came to their agreement. I got the lowest amount of kills, Arthedain getting the highest, and again, I think Arthedain do deserve credit for the fact that they were quite bold, but ultimately it was quite foolhardy, the army that they brought, and the fact that they tried to push on both flanks in this situation, because when you do that, both of your opponents are going to have to answer that in force, and that often means that they will ignore one another for large sections of the early game. I do still think that this match could have turned out very differently with a few minor tweaks even to Arthedain's army composition and wiser use of Dale's cavalry. If Dale had used their Earls a little bit more wisely, then they could have entrapped my cav and maybe even finished it off with the Blackshot Dragon Slayers and what was left of their River Patrol's ammunition. But that didn't materialise. I think that against Rohan, if you're playing as Arthedain, you need to not bring your very lightly armoured horse archers and your lightly armoured lancers, because that's exactly the sort of target that Rohan is going to want you to bring. The heavily armoured knights, the Knights of Illuminas, will be a little bit more of a tough nut to crack, and definitely a more direct answer to the Sons of Yule, and definitely would have had me worried. Having a look at my statistics, Sons of Yule doing very well for themselves, but the Riddermark skirmishers, in my opinion, were my MVPs, getting good kills between them and securing me the cav advantage, which was ultimately what won me the fight in the late game. Too many targets for Dale's Blackshot Dragon Slayers to aim at. Some of my units getting over 100 kills. Obviously the Shield Maidens doing very, very well. They secured me the victory in the late game like I wanted them to. Riddermark Archers doing decently well considering their lower tier archers, and the Riddermark Axemen, of course, carving their way through those trash units. So yeah, a quick 1v1v1, and you know, this is the first battle of mine I've posted up in quite a while, and honestly it's not often that I win with Rohan, so I was very happy to accept that, and obviously coming relatively soon will be the Rohan faction overview. And getting a feel for Rohan is satisfying, but obviously it could have gone very wrong for me in this battle. If both players had decided to charge me from various angles, my low tier spears would have crumbled and my horse archers wouldn't have been able to directly support them enough. So yeah, could go one way or the other. It was definitely a risky composition by me, but I feel as though in terms of compositions, Arthedain took the biggest risk and ultimately it didn't pay off. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, which I think is going to be the Harad faction showcase.